I worked at Westfield Innovations for 10 years, building a strong relationship with the owner, Thomas Westfield, who became like a mentor to me. When Thomas announced his retirement, his son Jackson would take over. Despite my dedication to the company and the groundbreaking project I was developing, Jackson had always seemed cold toward me. On his first day as CEO, he called me into his office and fired me on the spot, claiming, "We do not need lazy people like you." If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how this shocking betrayal turned into the most unexpected victory of my career. Growing up in Seattle with limited means, I never had the opportunity for an expensive education. My parents worked multiple jobs to keep our family afloat, and I started working part-time jobs when I was just 14. College was a luxury we simply could not afford, so after high school I jumped straight into the workforce. I bounced between several jobs, learning whatever skills I could along the way, determined to build a career despite my lack of formal education. When I applied for an entry-level position at Westfield Innovations, I honestly did not expect much. The company had a reputation for hiring top talent from prestigious universities, and my resume was notably lacking in that department. But during my interview, Thomas Westfield, the founder and CEO, asked questions that went beyond my educational background. He wanted to know how I thought, how I approached problems, and what drove me. "Bo," he said after our conversation, "credentials are important, but they are not everything. I see something in you that cannot be taught in classrooms. You have hunger and determination." I started in the customer service department, answering phones and handling basic inquiries. But I made it my mission to learn everything I could about our products. I stayed late studying manuals, asked engineers questions during lunch breaks, and volunteered for any extra projects I could get my hands on. Thomas noticed my efforts. Within 18 months, he moved me to product development as an assistant. Over the next few years, I worked my way up through the ranks. Thomas became more than just my boss. He became a mentor, a father figure of sorts. When my marriage fell apart 5 years into my time at Westfield, Thomas gave me the flexibility I needed to handle the emotional fallout. He invited me to dinner at his home where we talked not as employer and employee but as friends. "Life will knock you down sometimes, Bo," he told me that night. "The measure of a man is not how he avoids falling, but how he rises after the fall." With his guidance and trust, I eventually became director of product development, leading a team of 12 talented individuals. My lack of formal education became an advantage in some ways. I approached problems differently, unrestrained by conventional thinking that often comes with traditional training. 2 years ago, I began work on what would become my most ambitious project yet. We called it Project Phoenix, an innovative software solution that could potentially increase company revenue by 30%. I poured everything into this project, often working 16-hour days and weekends. My team and I built prototypes, conducted market research, and refined our approach countless times. Thomas gave me complete freedom to run with my vision, checking in periodically but never micromanaging. The project was entering its final development phase when Thomas called a company-wide meeting. Standing before all 140 employees, he announced his retirement. At 65, he wanted to travel the world with his wife and spend more time with his grandchildren. "But Westfield Innovations will continue to thrive," Thomas assured us. "My son Jackson has completed his MBA from Wharton and has been working with various tech firms to prepare for this moment. I am confident he will lead this company to even greater heights." Jackson, 28 years old, with perfectly tailored suits and the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege, stepped up to the microphone. He spoke about innovation, growth, and the future. His words were impressive, full of business school jargon and ambitious projections. As Jackson spoke, I felt genuinely optimistic. Fresh leadership could bring new perspectives, and I was excited to share Project Phoenix with someone who might have connections and ideas that could take it even further. I imagined forming the same kind of mentoring relationship with Jackson that I had enjoyed with Thomas. Perhaps I could even learn from his formal business education while offering my practical experience in return. Thomas had always spoken fondly of his son, describing him as brilliant and forward-thinking. I had met Jackson briefly at company events over the years, but we had never really spoken at length. This would be a new chapter for all of us, and I was ready to embrace it. "The transition will take place over the next month," Thomas explained. "Jackson will be shadowing me, learning the day-to-day operations before officially taking over as CEO. I ask that you give him the same loyalty and dedication you have shown me all these years." As the meeting concluded, I approached Jackson to introduce myself properly, and congratulate him. I extended my hand, smiling warmly. I am really looking forward to working with you, especially on Project Phoenix, I said enthusiastically. I would love to schedule some time to walk you through what we have been developing. Jackson shook my hand, but his grip was loose, his eyes already looking past me to someone else in the room. Sure, he replied flatly. Have your assistant contact mine. I brushed off the coolness of his response, assuming he was simply overwhelmed with all the new faces and responsibilities. Change is difficult for everyone, and Jackson had big shoes to fill. I decided to give him time to settle in before approaching again about Project Phoenix. The following week I received a calendar invitation for a project review meeting with Jackson. I spent hours preparing a comprehensive presentation about Project Phoenix, its market potential development timeline, and projected return on investment. I wanted to impress him to show that his father had been right to put his faith in me despite my unconventional background. When I entered the conference room, Jackson was typing on his phone. He barely looked up as I set up my presentation. Good morning, Jackson, I said cheerfully. I have prepared an overview of Project Phoenix that I think will really excite you. Just keep it brief, he replied, still focused on his phone. I have another meeting in 30 minutes. Throughout my presentation, Jackson appeared disinterested. He checked his watch repeatedly, asked no questions, and seemed irritated when I went into technical details. When I showed him the market research indicating potential revenue increases, he finally looked up. These projections seem optimistic, he said dismissively. Have you accounted for market volatility? What about competitor responses? Did you run sensitivity analysis? Before I could answer, he continued. This is exactly the problem with lacking formal business training. The real world is not built on hopes and dreams, Bo. His words stung, but I maintained my composure. Actually, I did run sensitivity analysis. If you turn to Appendix C in the report I provided, you will see 3 different scenarios, including worst-case projections. Even in our most conservative estimate, the ROI is substantial. Jackson flipped through the report carelessly, clearly not reading it. I will review this later and get back to you. That is all for now. As I packed up my materials, I could not shake the feeling that something was off. This was more than new boss nervousness or generational differences in management style. There seemed to be a personal edge to his dismissiveness. The next day, I was discussing the meeting with Sarah, our marketing director, and my closest friend at the company over lunch in the break room. I do not know what I did wrong, I confessed. It was like he had already decided not to like the project before I even opened my mouth. Sarah looked around to make sure no one was within earshot, then leaned forward. This is not about the project, Bo. This is about you. What do you mean? Remember about 5 years ago, when Jackson was still in business school? He came to that strategy meeting with his idea for expanding into consumer wearables. The memory came flooding back. Jackson, still in his early 20s, had proudly presented a business proposal to Thomas and the executive team. I had been invited as the product development representative. The proposal was fundamentally flawed based on outdated market research and a misunderstanding of manufacturing costs. When Thomas asked for opinions, I had given my honest assessment, suggesting we would need more research before making such a significant investment. Thomas sided with you, Sarah continued. He shelved the idea right there in front of everyone. Jackson was humiliated, and he has never forgotten it. But that was just business, I protested. Nothing personal. His idea really was not viable at that time. To you, it was business. To a young man trying to impress his father, it was very personal. Sarah sighed. Look, I worked with Jackson at Tech Fusion before coming here. He keeps score, Bo. And he has a habit of pushing out people he sees as threats, or those who have crossed him in the past. I refused to believe it could be that petty. That was 5 years ago. Surely he would not hold a grudge over constructive feedback from a legitimate business discussion. I hope I am wrong, Sarah replied. But be careful. Jackson plays by different rules than Thomas. Despite my concerns, I decided to make one more attempt at building a professional relationship with Jackson. I invited him to lunch to discuss Project Phoenix in a more casual setting. To my surprise, he accepted. We met at an upscale restaurant near the office. I tried to keep the conversation light at first, asking about his experiences at Wharton and his previous work. Jackson gave short, disinterested answers, checking his phone constantly. When our food arrived, I steered the conversation toward Project Phoenix, explaining my passion for the project and how I believed it could transform the company. You know, Bo, Jackson finally said, setting down his phone, my father has always had a soft spot for underdogs. People without the proper qualifications who he believes just need a chance. It is admirable in a way, but not always good business. Thomas gave me an opportunity, yes, I acknowledged. but I have proven myself over the past 10 years. Project Phoenix is solid based on extensive research and development. Is it Jackson raised an eyebrow? Or is it just another example of my father being too soft, too willing to throw money at projects championed by his favorites rather than making sound business decisions? His implication was clear, and it took all my self-control not to react defensively. Instead, I tried a different approach. I understand you want to make your own mark on the company, Jackson. That is completely natural. What if we work together to refine Project Phoenix? Your business expertise combined with my product knowledge could make it even stronger. Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nice try. But I have my own vision for Westfield Innovations, and it does not include pet projects from my father's era. The lunch ended awkwardly, with neither of us having touched much of our food. As we walked back to the office, I felt a growing sense of dread. This was not just about a difference in management style. This was personal, and I was clearly in Jackson's crosshairs. Over the next 3 weeks, Jackson's hostility became more overt. First, he cut Project Phoenix's budget by 40% without warning or discussion. When I asked for an explanation, I was told it was a company-wide cost-saving measure, yet no other department seemed affected. Next, he reassigned 3 of my most talented team members to other projects, claiming their skills were needed elsewhere. Their replacements were junior developers with little experience in the technologies we were using. Important decisions requiring executive approval languished in Jackson's inbox for days, sometimes weeks. Each delay pushed our timeline further back, threatening the project's viability. When I finally managed to get a meeting to discuss these issues, Jackson was dismissive. If you and your team were as competent as my father believed, you would adapt to these challenges, he said coldly. Maybe the project is not as robust as you claimed. I was determined not to let Project Phoenix fail. I worked longer hours to compensate for the team changes. I spent my own money on software licenses we needed when purchase orders were mysteriously delayed. I documented everything, meticulously building a paper trail of Jackson's obstructive actions, though I was not sure how or if I would ever use it. My health began to suffer. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and started experiencing stress headaches almost daily. Sarah noticed the change in me. "You look terrible, Beau," she said one evening as we worked late. "This is not worth killing yourself over." "I cannot just give up," I replied, rubbing my temples. "This project is too important. And if I back down now, Jackson wins." "This is not a game," Sarah warned. "From what I have heard, Jackson is planning to cancel Project Phoenix entirely after his father fully steps back. He is already talking to his business school buddy about bringing in a completely different product line." The news hit me like a physical blow. 2 years of my life, countless hours of work by my team, a project that could genuinely transform the company, all to be discarded because of a personal grudge. It felt like more than I could bear. I requested a meeting with Thomas, hoping he might intervene. Though he was gradually stepping back from daily operations, he was still technically the CEO until the end of the month. We met at a coffee shop away from the office. "I have noticed the changes," Beau Thomas said before I could even explain the situation fully. "Jackson has his own management style, and there will naturally be some adjustments during this transition. With all due respect, Thomas, this is more than a different management style. Project Phoenix is being systematically dismantled. The team is demoralized, the timeline is shot, and I have heard rumors that Jackson plans to cancel it entirely once you are gone." Thomas sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "I trust my son, Beau. He has excellent business training and fresh ideas. Sometimes projects need to be reevaluated under new leadership." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. After 10 years of mentorship and trust, Thomas was dismissing my concerns without real consideration. I felt betrayed, not just professionally, but personally. So that is it. Everything I have built, everything we have worked for, just thrown away. Thomas's expression softened. "I understand your frustration, Beau, but I need to let Jackson make his own decisions as CEO. That said, I have not completely left you unprotected." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Check your employment contract, specifically the addendum we added 2 years ago when you began Project Phoenix. There are certain provisions there that might be relevant to your current situation." Before I could ask for clarification, Thomas stood up. "I am leaving for Europe tomorrow morning. A month-long cruise with my wife, completely disconnected. When I return, I hope to find that you and Jackson have found a way to work together productively." With that cryptic advice, Thomas left me sitting alone, confused and more worried than ever about my future at Westfield Innovations. The day Thomas officially handed over control to Jackson, the entire company gathered for a transition ceremony. Jackson gave a speech full of ambitious promises and vague business platitudes. He talked about streamlining operations, cutting dead weight, and bringing in fresh perspectives. Throughout his speech, his gaze repeatedly landed on me, his meaning unmistakable. After the ceremony, I returned to my office to find an email requesting my immediate presence in the CEO suite, now Jackson's domain. Walking into that familiar space was jarring. All traces of Thomas were gone. The warm leather chairs had been replaced with sleek modern furniture. The family photos and nautical art that Thomas loved had been swapped for abstract paintings and awards. It was as if Thomas Westfield had never existed there. Jackson sat behind the massive desk, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth as I entered. Without invitation, I took a seat across from him. "Thank you for coming so promptly, Bo," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "I will not waste your time or mine. Today is my first official day as CEO, and I am making some immediate changes to the company structure." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of changes? Your position has been eliminated effective immediately." Jackson's smile widened. "We do not need lazy people like you in this company." The accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. I had worked more hours than anyone in the company for years. I had sacrificed my health, my personal life, everything for Westfield Innovations. "Lazy," I repeated, my voice steady, despite the rage and hurt building inside me. "Could you explain exactly what you mean by that?" Jackson leaned forward. 2 years on one project with nothing to show for it except wasted resources and missed deadlines. Constantly running to my father for special treatment. Undermining my authority with other employees. Should I continue? Each accusation was a twist of the knife, each one completely unfounded. I knew arguing would be pointless. Jackson had made his decision long before this meeting. "I would like to see documentation of these performance issues," I said calmly. "And I would like to understand how my role is being eliminated when Project Phoenix is still underway." "Project Phoenix is being terminated," Jackson replied coldly. "As for documentation, this is not a negotiation. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings and then off the premises. Your final paycheck will include 2 weeks of severance, which is more than generous given the circumstances." I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but petty triumph. This was his revenge for a 5-year-old slight, nothing more. In that moment, I remembered Thomas's words about my contract. I decided not to show my hand just yet. Instead, I stood up slowly, straightened my jacket, and smiled politely. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity to work at Westfield Innovations." My calm response clearly disappointed Jackson, who seemed to have expected tears or anger. As I turned to leave, he called after me. "By the way, Bo, I would not count on using my father as a reference. He and I are in complete agreement about this decision." I said nothing, simply nodding and walking out with my dignity intact. Outside, Sarah and several other colleagues were waiting, their faces full of concern. Word had spread fast. "Is it true?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Yes. I have been fired. Project Phoenix is dead." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, detached and hollow. Sarah grabbed my arm. "This is wrong, Bo. We should all resign in protest. Half the development team would walk out with you." I shook my head firmly. "No. Do not throw away your careers. This is my battle, not yours." I lowered my voice. "And I am not done fighting yet." That night, in my apartment, I pulled out my employment contract and read it carefully, particularly the addendum Thomas had mentioned. What I found stunned me. When I began Project Phoenix, Thomas had added special provisions regarding intellectual property and unfair dismissal. The key clauses stated that any projects I developed while at Westfield would remain partially my intellectual property. If I was terminated without documented cause, I would be entitled to substantial compensation and could take the project with me to develop elsewhere. Furthermore, the company would be obligated to pay for all development costs incurred up to that point. It was an extraordinary level of protection, unlike anything I had ever seen in an employment contract. Thomas must have anticipated something like this might happen when he stepped down. As I was processing this information, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. "Hello, Bo, it is Thomas." His voice sounded tight with anger. "I just landed at SeaTac and got your message. I cut my trip short when I heard what happened. Can you meet me at the office tomorrow morning at 9? "Of course," I replied, surprised. "But I thought you were going to be unreachable for a month." "That was the plan, but my assistant knew to contact me in case of emergency." "This qualifies. I will see you tomorrow." "And Bo, bring your contract." The next morning, I arrived at Westfield Innovations with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. The security guard at the front desk, who had always greeted me by name, now looked uncomfortable as he checked his list. "I am sorry, Mr. Calloway, but you have been removed from the approved visitor list." "He is with me, Carl," came Thomas's voice from behind us. The security guard's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Westfield, we were not expecting you back so soon." "Evidently not," Thomas replied dryly. "Please add Mr. Calloway back to the permanent approved list immediately." As we rode the elevator up to the executive floor, Thomas was uncharacteristically quiet. His jaw was set in a hard line, his usually friendly eyes cold with anger. Not at me, I realized, but at the situation. "I apologize for cutting your trip short," I said, breaking the silence. "No need. Some things are more important than vacation." He glanced at me. "Did you bring the contract?" I patted my briefcase. "Yes, and you were right about the addendum. It is quite comprehensive." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "I have known my son his entire life, Beau. I love him dearly, but I am not blind to his flaws." When we reached the executive floor, Thomas strode directly to Jackson's office, now his office, with the confidence of a man who still owned the building, which I reminded myself he did. His executive assistant, Jennifer, nearly dropped her coffee when she saw him. "Mr. Westfield, you are back." "Just temporarily, Jennifer." "Is my son in?" "Yes, sir. He is on a call, but—" Thomas did not wait for her to finish pushing open the door without knocking. Jackson was indeed on a phone call, his feet up on the desk. When he saw his father, his face went through a rapid succession of emotions: surprise, confusion, and finally apprehension. "I will have to call you back," he said hurriedly into the phone before hanging up. "Dad, what are you doing here? Your cruise." "Why the hell did you fire Beau?" Thomas demanded without preamble. "Have not you read the contract?" Jackson's eyes darted to me, standing behind his father, then back to Thomas. "This is a business decision that falls under my authority as CEO. We do not need to discuss this with him present." "Beau stays," Thomas said firmly. "And you have not answered my question. Did you read his contract before terminating him?" Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "I reviewed the standard company termination procedures with HR. They assured me everything was in order. So that is a no," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned to me. "Beau, would you please show my son the relevant sections of your contract?" I opened my briefcase and handed Jackson a copy of my contract with the key sections highlighted. As he read, his face grew increasingly pale. "This cannot be legal," he finally said, looking up at his father. "You cannot give away company intellectual property in an individual employment contract." "I had it thoroughly vetted by 3 separate law firms," Thomas replied calmly. "It is completely legal and binding. As the majority shareholder and CEO at the time, I had full authority to approve those terms." Jackson flipped to another page, his expression shifting from disbelief to alarm. 50% ownership of the project. Financial penalties equivalent to double the development costs. This would bankrupt the company. "Not bankruptcy," Thomas corrected, "but certainly a significant financial hit. More importantly, it would mean Westfield Innovations losing exclusive rights to what could be the most profitable product in our history." Jackson threw the contract down on the desk. "Why would you do this? Set me up to fail before I even started." Thomas shook his head sadly. "I did not set you up to fail, Jackson. I set up a safeguard to protect one of our most valuable employees from exactly the kind of vindictive, short-sighted decision you just made. I hoped you would never trigger it." The truth finally seemed to dawn on Jackson. He had been outsmarted by his father before he even made his move. His face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "So what now?" he asked bitterly. "You override my decision, take back control of the company, make me look like a fool. Now we fix this," Thomas said firmly, "and learn from it. Beau, what would it take for you to stay at Westfield and continue leading Project Phoenix?" The question caught me off guard. After everything that had happened, I had been prepared to take my project and leave. But looking at Thomas, I remembered all he had done for me over the years. And despite everything, I still believed in Westfield Innovations. Full autonomy over Project Phoenix, I began. Restoration of the original budget, plus 20% to make up for lost time. My team returned to me intact. A promotion to Vice President of Product Development. I paused, then added, and a public apology and retraction of all accusations against me. Jackson started to protest, but Thomas held up his hand. "Those terms are reasonable given the circumstances." Anything else, I considered for a moment. 10% ownership stake in the company, contingent on Project Phoenix meeting its revenue projections after launch. This time, Jackson could not contain himself. "That is outrageous. 10% of the entire company for one project." Thomas looked thoughtful. "Not outrageous if you truly believe in the project's potential. Do you stand by your 30% revenue increase projection, Bo? I do, I replied confidently. In fact, with adequate support, I believe we could exceed that. Thomas nodded. Then we have a deal. Jackson. Jackson looked from his father to me, clearly calculating his limited options. Finally, he nodded stiffly. Fine. But this is the last time you undermine my authority, Dad. I am not undermining you, Thomas replied. I am teaching you. The most important asset any company has is its people. Not its equipment, not its patents, not its cash reserves. It's people. Treat them well, they will make you rich. Treat them poorly, they will destroy you. That is the most valuable lesson I can give you as you take over this company. Jackson did not look convinced, but he nodded again. I understand, good Thomas said. Now I suggest you draft that public apology immediately. Bo will be back at his desk this afternoon, and I want this resolved before the end of the day. As we left Jackson's office, Thomas put his hand on my shoulder. I am sorry you had to go through this, Bo. It was not how I planned the transition to go. Thank you for coming back, I said sincerely. And for the contract protection. I would never have thought to ask for those terms. Thomas smiled. I know. That is why I added them without telling you. Some lessons about business cannot be taught in school. Jackson will learn that eventually. True to his word, Thomas stayed at the company for another 6 months, delaying his retirement to ensure the transition went smoothly. Under his watchful eye, Jackson and I established a tense but functional working relationship. Project Phoenix got back on track with full funding and support. When the product finally launched 8 months later, it exceeded even my optimistic projections, increasing company revenue by 42% in the first year. My 10% ownership stake made me a wealthy man, but more importantly, it gave me a permanent voice in the company's future. As for Jackson, the experience changed him. Not overnight, and not completely, but gradually. He learned to judge people by their contributions, rather than their credentials. He began to listen more and dictate less. And most surprisingly, he started to ask for my input on other projects and strategies. 2 years later, as I sit in my office as Executive Vice President of Innovation, I reflect on the journey. The betrayal and pain eventually led to growth not just for me, but for Jackson and the company as a whole. Thomas visits occasionally proud of what we have built together. The lesson I learned through all of this is simple but profound. Your worth is not determined by others' perceptions, but by what you know you can contribute. And sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as devastating setbacks. When you face them with integrity and perseverance, you may find yourself exactly where you were meant to be all along. If you have ever faced a situation where someone underestimated you or tried to hold you back unfairly, share your story in the comments below. How did you overcome it? What lessons did you learn? Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for listening. And remember, your greatest comeback might be just around the corner.